we now have our third incredible leader that is going to share her testimony with us. Can I hear it for Sydney? Yes! They did it. They really did it.
They really did.
You let them come, and I love it. All right, so we have kind of an interesting way that we are connected and know each other.
Yes.
You are a coworker of my husband, which I love, which also means that I'll be hearing a lot of this story for the first time because I heard it from a man. No, I'm just kidding. I called you. I knew better. But let's dig in. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do this. All right. So let's start with a desire that you had on your heart since you can remember, which actually led to a roadside pull-off to a very unsuspecting boyfriend.
Oh,
Yes. So tell us about that roadside drive-off and what it was that the Lord put on your heart from a young age.
Yeah, so I, similar to Meredith, grew up in a Christian household, was blessed with salvation at an early age, and so in college, I just really felt like the Lord was calling me to more. And so I decided to do the world race, an 11-month mission trip, and when I was applying, they said, well, are you single? And I said, yes, very. And they were like, well, can you commit to staying single until you get home? And I said, yes, absolutely. And then I met somebody.
That's usually when it happens, right?
Yes, which my mom was very pleased with because she thought, good, she'll come home now. And he was great. And so we started dating, and I still did leave for the world race. So the first part of our relationship was very, very long distance. And, you know, at some point as you grow in your dating relationship, he kind of said something about us having children, and I was like, oh, well, I'm adopting. And he was like, do you want, like, biological kids? And I was like, maybe, but, like, I'm going to adopt. And he was like, okay. And I was like, okay. And then right before I thought he was going to propose, I was like, oh, I need to know, like, really where he stands with this.
Yeah.
And so I made him pull the car over one night. And I was like, hey, so I know we like briefly talked about this, but I feel like things are getting pretty serious, and I think you might propose soon, and I just need you to know, like, this call to adoption.
Seems reasonable to me.
I was like, it's not going away,
yeah.
And I'm very committed to it, and I need to know that you're not just okay with it or open to it, but that you're committed to it with me.
Yeah.
And he said, 100%, I want to walk that road with you.
I love it.
Yeah.
So that didn't make him run. He was all in at that point.
Yeah.
So y'all got married, and then
did.
about a year into marriage, you got some news.
We did. I was diagnosed with endometriosis about a year into marriage, and it was comforting that we finally had a diagnosis, but also a little fearful because there's lots of different stages, and there's a lot still unknown about that disease. But we were told at the time if we ever wanted biological children, it should happen sooner rather than later. And I was teaching and hating it.
We are blessing the teachers in the audience. There's nothing against teaching. This was not for you.
I was not doing well. I was pouring out every bit of myself into a job and just trying to survive day to day. And the thought of bringing a child into that did not feel like the right time for that. And I wanted to adopt. Like, biological kids were great, but Perry and I always intended to start our family through adoption. But now, a whopping 1 year into marriage, I feel like we were facing some, like, really critical decisions.
Yeah. So what did decision-making look like at that point?
So at that point, it was, well, we can't bring a child in just out of fear that it won't happen later. So we took a breath, and we paused, and we did a lot of praying, and we just decided we will evaluate this in another year.
Okay.
From now. So a year later, we went to the mountains and tried to really pray and spend some time thinking about how we really wanted to start our family. And I really felt like the Lord was saying we should try for a biological child. And I was a little angry about that because that wasn't my plan.
Sure.
And I don't like when things aren't my plan.
Yeah. Again, seems fair.
Yeah. But we made the decision that the next year we would start trying to conceive on our own.
Okay. How did that go?
Within a month, I had another surgery. And at that point, our doctor, she looked at me and said, everything is good. And so we're not playing around with this. If you're not pregnant in 3 months, we need you to go to a fertility clinic.
Wow.
And Perry and I are like, I don't even know. Like, this wasn't our plan. And we thought the Lord called us to this. So, like, why is this not just happening for us? And so I felt like I was counting down the days of those 3 months.
Yeah.
And we were not pregnant. And we ended up at the fertility clinic. And I felt very strange because I thought, I don't know how far down this road we're willing to go, knowing that I'm feeling called to adopt.
Yeah.
And that's going to cost a lot of money.
Sure.
But we felt like we were supposed to be there, so we started forking out more money than what we pay for our mortgage every month at a fertility clinic. And every month I was not pregnant. And I would have to tell my husband, who I thought would make an incredible dad, that I was not pregnant. And I did have a different job at this point, which was much better. But a long commute, and I would cry every day on the way to the commute. And I didn't understand why I felt the Lord had called me to something and then wasn't giving it to me.
Wow.
And I felt hurt by that.
Is that where you were with the Lord? Hurt? What was your relationship like with him at this point?
Hurt, but it was like this fear that if he doesn't come through here, I don't know what's going to be left for me to believe in. Like, then will I ever be able to trust that I'm hearing from the Lord well? Will I ever be able to trust that he's good? Will I ever be able to think of him as kind? And there was a song that was instrumental to me this time, and it Fade Away. It's a song from Passion, and it was, if you're not in it, then I don't want it. And there was a morning when I had to leave for work, and I couldn't look my husband in the eyes and tell him that I had started my period again that day. So I waited till I got in my car and I texted him because I couldn't look at him again. And I listened to that song the whole way to work, and that's really when it turned for me that I just decided that if I don't want this without God. And so whatever he has for me, I'm here. And at that point, I knew my faith was going to make it. I wasn't sure if I was, but my faith was going to stand.
Yeah.
And that was big for me.
That's huge. So take us to November 2019. It seems like storms happen all at once.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with infertility at this point. You're texting your husband because you can't look him in the face, but your faith is surviving.
It's surviving.
And then you don't have children, so you love your dog like he is your child.
Yes.
And what happens?
So we're going to back up a little bit.
Yeah, back up.
So at the end of a couple of months after being at the fertility clinic, the doctor looked at us and said, I think your only option at this point is IVF. And she's like, but you guys told me from the beginning you weren't open to that. And she's like, can I just ask again why? And we told her, we said, we don't have the money for it because we're trying really hard to save money for adoption. And I said, I just can't, like, we can't commit to that. And I was like, I'm not really sure that that's like our route. I didn't feel like the Lord was calling us there. And she said, well, have you heard of embryo adoption? And I said, no, I haven't. And so she explained that it's, I know, bear with me here, but it's couples that have gone through their own IVF journey and they have remaining embryos left over when they feel like their family is complete, but they have these other embryos that are still frozen and they don't know what to do with them. So one option they have is to donate them, and you can adopt them from a donor couple. And she said, that might be a good option for you guys. You should look into it. So Perry and I did, and we prayed about it a lot, and we had to explain that to our families, which is a hard concept because you guys just got like the 5-second version of it.
Sure.
And we really felt called that was the thing to do. had no idea how we were going to pay for it.
Yeah.
And so we applied, started the home study process, like all of the things are going forward, and we have an appointment set up in Knoxville, Tennessee, where our clinic was going to be. And when I say I didn't know how we were going to pay for it, like I was like, I'm going to have to ask my parents, because like I don't know where we're going to get this money from.
Sure.
And a week before we're supposed to go to that appointment, like Alex mentioned, our dog is our life. His name is Hercules, and he's very, very cute. He had started having seizures. We thought they were being controlled with medicine, but then they were not, and things went downhill very quickly. And so a week before we're supposed to walk into this clinic that I don't know how we're going to pay for, but I feel like we're supposed to be there, my dog ends up in the hospital with a bill that's $1,000 more than what I was going to have to pay to the clinic the next week. And I would have paid anything to keep that dog alive, because he was our world. And so it was a complete surrender of absolutely everything in our lives. Finances, emotions, all of it. And all I could think was, the Lord won't give me a baby, and now he's going to kill my dog.
So where's your faith at this point?
Well, you heard it.
Yeah, that's pretty
it was
clear.
there, but
Yeah.
there was a lot of anger.
Yeah.
I hadn't turned away from God, but I did not think he was good, and I really didn't think he wanted good things for me. Felt like he was manipulative. Like I didn't want to be down this route anyway.
Yeah.
I just wanted to adopt. Like that's a thing you can just do. You can't. But I was like, why are we here? Like I felt like you called us here, and you're not doing anything to help it.
Yeah. So Hercules gets better.
Yes.
And
with a lot of medicine.
Yes, lots of expensive medicine.
Yes.
And we are now going down the embryo adoption route.
Yes.
What does it look like?
So our first appointment at our fertility clinic, the NEDC, was March 9th, 10th, 2020. Yes. And if you have walked the fertility journey or know anybody who has, the pandemic, during that time, fertility treatment was seen as elective. So right when I finally thought this was like God parting the Red Sea for me, and we're walking into embryo adoption, and this is finally going to work out, and we're finally going to be able to start our family, literally a pandemic hits, and everything is getting shut down. I cannot get ultrasounds. I cannot get the appointments that I need to get. Home studies, non-existent. Won't come to your house and approve you to adopt. So then we can't, like, we're just stuck and can't make steps forward. And it feels like, again, like, why?
Yeah.
Why are we in this?
So things do start to finally roll around, but
They do.
you were stagnant for a little bit.
We were stagnant for a little bit.
And feeling like you were put under the pressure of just the waiting game, and is it going to happen?
Yes.
But then it starts to.
It starts to. We matched with incredible donor couples, and we adopted embryos, and things are all set up that we were going to have a transfer in September. And then after doing all of the work to know exactly what my body was supposed to do on this medicine, when it was time, my body did not do that. And so 5 days before we were supposed to have our first transfer, that got canceled. Again.
Yeah.
It was mountain after mountain and time after time of like, why is this not coming through? But I was grateful. I was able to have gratitude in that at least there was no loss of life, that if something was wrong with my body, we caught it now before we transferred embryos, and we could fix it.
Yeah.
Before the next transfer.
So it gets fixed. You'll figure it out.
And we transfer in December. Embryo adoption is sometimes referred to as snowflake adoption because they are frozen. And we transferred 2 beautiful and perfect embryos in December of 2020. And snow fell on Georgia that year for Christmas. And it felt so special because I was holding on to these little tiny snowflakes inside of me. And everything pointed out that this should be right. And so the day after Christmas, I took an at-home pregnancy test, which they tell you to not do, and I do not listen to them. And for the first time ever, it was positive. And so we were rejoicing, yes. And 2 days later, when I went in for my blood draw, I took another pregnancy test, and the line was lighter. And I thought, well, that's weird. I must have drank more water yesterday. And I threw it under the sink, and I went to get the blood draw. And on my way home from work, the nurse calls and says it's not good. She said there's like a level that they want to see it at, and mine were significantly below that. And at that point, she told me that pregnancy was probably not viable and that I would lose it. But she said, you can continue your medicine and you come back in 2 days and we'll check it again. And I did that, and they were gone. And I was not pregnant anymore. And that was hard.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
So even though you're going through the ebbs and flows and you feel all these mountains, your faith is staying, and now you've had this loss of life. You're devastated, and yet you're trying to look for God's faithfulness in it.
So hard.
What happens then?
Can I read?
You may.
Okay. I journaled a lot through this time, thankfully. And so this was like 12 days maybe after our loss. And I said, God, I'm not really sure what you've promised me. I know that heaven will be perfect and there everything will be okay, but what about before then? What about losing my babies was good or merciful? And truthfully, I don't want an answer to that because I can't imagine an answer that is worthy. They died 100 years too soon, and nothing about that is good. I'd rather believe it happened because we live in an evil world and sometimes bad and horrible things happen. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. Father, you are the ultimate ruler. You will make all things right. You provide comfort and protection, and you hold me. And as much as I don't want to see any good in this loss, I also don't want to wait until heaven before I feel like things are good or right. I don't want to have to wait to heaven to feel protected, comforted, and held. Be with me now, Lord. Hold me now. Comfort me now. Our loss will never be good or evil. It's both. Because we live in a hard, evil world where death exists and God is sovereign. Lord, I hate that this had to happen this way, and I hate that this is a part of our story, and I would have never chosen this, but I'm trying to trust you. Carry me through, please, Lord.
Ooh.
I made a decision that if we are all created with a purpose, then those little tiny babies were created with a purpose. And so if their lives were going to be that short, I promised them they would glorify God. And so I shared and I talked about it, and I pushed into my faith, and I leaned into the people around us. And I just made the decision that their story would bring glory to God.
Yeah. That's incredible insight. So you are now picking up the pieces.
Yeah.
And you take a minute, you and Perry, to decide what's next. But you decide to try again.
We decided to go forward with another transfer.
So what's that look like?
In April, and hope was much harder to come by that time. It wasn't the same excitement. It wasn't the same, I don't know, it was hard. It was like touching the stove again after somebody said, that's hot and it will hurt. And I said, yeah, absolutely, let's do that again.
Yeah.
It was hard.
Yeah.
But we did. We moved forward, and on Perry's birthday, which was special in April, we transferred 2 more beautiful and perfect embryos, and that transfer was not, we lost a lot in the thawing process that time. And so there was even a moment when we're there for the transfer that I'm wondering if we're even going to get a transfer. Mm-hmm. And I was mad. Like, why do we just keep losing them and losing them and losing them? But we were able to walk out with 2 perfect little embryos transferred in us, and me. My husband carried the weight emotionally. And we went home, and I prayed that I would meet those babies face to face. And I had done a lot of studying on what God promised me. And I knew he didn't promise I'd have a baby, and I knew he didn't promise that things were going to be easy. But I knew he promised he'd be with me and that he'd comfort me and that he was good. And I actually have a little journal note from 2 days after our transfer when I said that I know you promised me all these things, Lord, but I'm still working on that Philippians 4 of being content in all circumstances. So I'm going to need some help with that.
Yeah.
If this doesn't work out this time.
Let's pause here because at some points through your journey, you've never understood the Israelites better.
Oh, me and those Israelites, man, they are my people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at one point, Alex texted us before this event asking, what books helped you in your time? And I'm like, Exodus. I read Exodus 3 times. I don't know.
Yeah, that's not generally where Ephesians sometimes.
Yeah, like the good stuff.
Exodus. But why? Why Exodus and why the Israelites? Why are they your people?
Because, like I kind of said earlier, I felt like the parting of the Red Sea was like us being able to walk through the embryo adoption. This was the answer, right? Like the Lord was going to take us to the promised land. I know he doesn't promise us a baby, but like we were coming into the good season now, the land of milk and honey. Like that's what I thought we were walking into. And then it's wilderness. It is. Your dog almost dying and not being able to afford it, and cycles getting canceled, and the pandemic. And every time, just like the Israelites, I'm looking back and going, why did you take me out of Egypt to bring me out here to die in this wilderness?
Yeah.
They were enslaved.
Yeah.
I was enslaved. And I felt like he had taken me out just to turn his back on me. So I related to the Israelites when they kept saying over and over that they felt that way.
Yeah.
Why did you bring me out here to die in the wilderness?
So now your eggs are in this basket, and you guys have this transfer with these 2 embryos.
Yeah.
What's it look like?
And again, I took another at-home pregnancy test. I know, we really should stop that. And it was positive. And it was like, okay.
Yeah.
There was not as much rejoicing this time. And we went in for the blood draw, and we got the call. And she said, congratulations, you're pregnant. And I did not get that call the first time.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, what are my numbers, Linda? That's my nurse's name.
Listen, Linda.
Because there was a level they want them to be at, and there's a level I wanted them to be at. And when she told me them, they were barely above what they wanted them to be at. And I said, so I'm barely pregnant. And she's like, today you're pregnant. And I said, okay. But I was bracing myself for bad news. And so those levels are supposed to double every 48 hours. And so 48 hours, I went for another blood test, and they stayed the exact same. And so at that point, I got another call saying it's not good. And there's a good chance you're going to lose this pregnancy too. But again, you can continue your meds through the weekend, and we'll recheck it on Monday.
Okay. So what's the weekend look like? Wait until Monday.
Yeah, I don't remember it.
Yeah.
I hurt.
Yeah.
And Monday, I took another pregnancy test, and it was a little darker, which was confusing. And I was like, I don't know what this means. And my numbers had risen a little bit, but not where they needed to be. So I was at work, and they called again, and I couldn't get my husband on the phone, and they called and said that this pregnancy is non-viable, and you will lose this one too. So you can stop your medicine and wait for the bleeding to start.
Wow.
And I said, okay.
So at this point, your first loss, you knew you were going to glorify God with this?
Yeah.
What about this one?
I called my friend on the way home, and I screamed, and I cried, and I cried. And I got home, and Perry's trying to just do anything he can to comfort me. And so we eat pizza and binge watch something on Netflix I don't remember. And I went to take the dishes in, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I sat down on the kitchen floor, and I promised God he would not get the glory this time, that it was my pain to carry, and I didn't want it good, and I didn't want a bow wrapped up on it. It sucked, and I wanted the world to know that it sucked. And that was it. And I was done being a puppet in his schemes, and I was done trying to live out whatever he was calling me into. I knew I wasn't done with God, but I had no desire left to bring him glory because he had not been kind to me.
So then what?
So we tried to function the next day. I didn't know if I could go through another transfer. I didn't know if I could do all that again. And so that was a Monday. So by Wednesday afternoon, Perry and I just decided to blow off work the rest of the afternoon. I was like, we're taking off. And we decided to go hike up a mountain and back. And we went up that mountain, and I wrote that day as well, if you don't mind me sharing.
Please.
And I said, we come to the mountains to find comfort, probably to find you somehow. And even this is hard. Looking at the mountains and seeing all that you are capable of and the beauty you can create, but at the same time knowing that death is happening inside of me. It's not fair. I don't know why it's me or Perry or my children or why this happened to our donors. But I know from all the details of the Bible that you piece together things in intricate webs and details we could never imagine. I hate the thought that something better is being worked out or that the best is yet to come because our children were perfect. But somehow, in some way, you were working the details of our lives out. And I looked at Perry and I asked him, I said, what do you think it means to be content in every circumstance? How was I supposed to be living that out? How was I supposed to be content in this? And I feel like I just had to get to a point there on that mountain, knowing that salvation is more than I deserve. And if I can find my contentment in that, then any other life circumstances will be okay. Hard, but okay.
Wow. So you have now resolved that at that mountain.
As much as we can.
Yeah.
There was still a lot of healing, but
Sure.
yes.
And then you guys decided to come home.
Yeah, and on the way home, I said, Perry, can we stop and get another pregnancy test? And he said, why are you doing that to yourself?
Yeah.
And I said, I want to know they're gone. I want to know when they're gone. And because my levels had been really weird, there was some concern that maybe it was an unhealthy pregnancy, potentially ectopic. And so the doctors had told me that I was going to need to do another blood draw at some point. But I had no physical signs of losing the pregnancy yet. So I took another one the next morning, and it was very positive. Mm-hmm. And so I called Linda, my nurse, and I said, Linda, I'm going to need another blood draw. And she said, oh, have you started bleeding? And I said, no, but I took another pregnancy test, and it's darker. She goes, oh, Sidney, those things aren't very accurate sometimes. And I said, well, they've always been pretty accurate for me. And she was like, did you stop your medicine? I said, yeah. She goes, then, honey, it's just not possible. It's not possible that this is going to be okay. And I said, well, I'm going out of town this weekend, and I really want another blood draw before I leave. And she said, I'll send in the orders, and we'll do it.
So what happened?
They had really risen. And they were still very low for what they wanted me to be at. So on the way to Illinois, with my mom and my sister and my future brother-in-law and my husband, cramped in a little tiny car, who have no idea any of this is going on. Except for my husband, he did. The nurse calls back, and she says, well, here are your levels. And I started sobbing. And she goes, what are you feeling? And I said, I feel like someone is inside of me doing everything they can to survive. And she said, well, I talked to the doctor, and he said, your levels are still too low, and this is still non-viable. And I said, well, I don't understand how they're doing everything they can to survive, and you're telling me to do nothing. And she said, I'll call you in a prescription. Can you get somewhere where you can get back on your meds? She's like, but we have to check this next week and know what's going on. And I said, absolutely.
So what happens next week?
That weekend was Mother's Day. The hardest Mother's Day I had ever had. I'm going to read again.
Let's do it.
I know. You guys are really getting to see the heart of everything here. So I said, I beg, Lord, give this life the best possible chance. Order their steps, choose to redeem them, sustain them if that's your will, for as long as you deem good. I know the chances of me meeting them face to face are very slim, but as long as they are fighting, so am I. Maybe I only get to keep them for a few more days, maybe only a week, but I will be there for them. Please be here for me. Give me the strength to love and lose them. Give me the peace to be a good mom, and give me the faith I need to trust you when I do lose them. It's a bizarre Mother's Day if there ever was one. I think I'm pregnant, but I don't get to plan for a baby. There is life inside of me that I don't get to meet face to face, and I'm doing everything I can to sustain them while knowing it won't be enough. Loving them, but not being able to save. Fighting for them, but trusting you. Protecting them, but with open hands. And so I had another blood draw the next week, and it had risen again. And at that point, the doctor said, well, you need an emergency ultrasound. We need to know what's going on right now. So I called every place I could to get an ultrasound. And we walked into a clinic we had never been in. And we saw our baby with a heartbeat on that little tiny screen.
Wow.
Yeah.
So God was glorified.
So I think back to that moment in my kitchen when I'm yelling at God saying, I absolutely will not glorify you. And I can picture him looking at me and saying, oh, Sydney, you will never be able to tell this story without glorifying me.
Woo! Amen. So your beautiful little Marley girl who just celebrated a birthday.
She just turned 1 year old.
That's amazing. Yeah, sweet little girl. So a lot of people would hear your story and just assume that the fact that you have a healthy baby girl, that's your restoration. But that's not what you lost.
No.
That the Lord restored. Tell us what it was.
So I had lost the belief that he was good, that he wanted good things. I had lost the desire to glorify him, obviously. I questioned him all of the time. Questioned his goodness, questioned why he brought me there, questioned his plans for me. I had lost the fact that he knows better and that he wants more for us than we could imagine. I'd lost all of that. And just like the Israelites, crossed over the Jordan with their stones of remembrance. He gave me a story of time after time where he came through. And so I can stand now in the promised land and point back to all those times he was faithful and good when I couldn't see it.
Yeah. That was good. Y'all, Sydney,